Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Rick Mullinax, and this is Burn After Reading Live. Okay, all right, this part isn't live, it's pre recorded, but we're going to go live soon. So, on May 5th, 1993, three 8-year-old boys were murdered in West Memphis, Arkansas. Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley were arrested, tried, and convicted of killing Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Christopher Byers. In 2011, they pled guilty, admitting the state had sufficient evidence to convict them while proclaiming their innocence to the crimes using the rare and unusual Alford plea. Because they accepted the plea, they were released with 10-year suspended sentences, having served 18 years. At that time of release, they were on parole. If they violated the conditions of it, they would end up back in prison. Now, allow me to vent because I'm so sick of hearing this particular statement. Well, if the West Memphis Three are really guilty, why did the state allow them to walk free? It's under this presumption that the state knows they are innocent, but are trying to preserve the conviction to spare themselves embarrassment or legal retaliation. Well, let me be clear. In different states and for different reasons, they do allow some murderers to go free after serving a lengthy sentence. Not all the time, but sometimes. Anyone ever heard of this little thing called parole hearing? Murderers have walked free because of them. The latest being Leslie Van Houten, a one-time devoted Charles Manson follower who helped murder the LaBianca couple. Now, some of you might say that's not the same thing, and fair enough, it's not particularly the same thing, but it's still going with this thing that people are trying to say that murderers don't get to walk free if they're really murderers. Yes, they do. There's been false statements and reports as to how this Alford plea came to be. The false narrative is as follows. The West Memphis Three defense team were granted an evidentiary hearing which could have led to a new trial. The state feared if a new trial happened, it would exonerate Damien, Jessie, and Jason, overturning their conviction. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. That's just the way it goes. Um, so I don't know how much of that you got to see, but anyways, how about we just try to get this started first? Everyone in the chat, can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can. All right. And how about you, Lisa? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And you were just getting to the good part.
Let's see. Let me do this. Let me try to put it back uh, where it was, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Give me one moment. All right. Let me go ahead and put it in, and then I will see where we're at. So, oh my God, it's just messing up. So
I'm so-
it's all your fault, Lisa. You
I'm
did this.
sorry. And I'm trying to join the chat and get into my YouTube account and it starts playing a video.
Yeah.
So
So
that was me.
no, that's okay. That's okay. It seems like when I try to put that in, it just kind of goofed. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
figured, we're not going to jinx it. We're not going to try to do it 5 or 6 times. Hopefully, we could talk like this. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll work. And then maybe what I'll do, I'll try to configure that into a later video if possible.
Great.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Burn After Reading live sometimes. And joining me today is Lisa O'Brien of the Based in Fact podcast. And she is a legal assistant, a paralegal, and a general know it all. Her podcast examines the most infamous true crime cases through the lens of the court, not the court of public opinion. Please go check out her podcast. You'll find it on most podcast apps, or you can check it out right here on YouTube. And if you check out season 1, she has multiple episodes on the West Memphis 3 case, but don't just limit yourself to that. Check everything out. And Lisa, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. I was so excited.
Thank you so much. As a matter of fact, you're my first guest, and ironically enough, the first interview I ever did was with you. So
Okay.
so that was my first ever. Later I did some with Roberta Glass, which was great. So
Hmm.
and if people don't know Roberta Glass, she has a great true crime podcast. So check that out as well. But let me ask you this question. Before we get into the whole alleged evidence against Terry Hobbs, when did you first learn of the West Memphis 3 case?
It was actually Paradise Lost on HBO.
I see. Okay. And
And
go on.
oh, go
No.
ahead.
Oh, no, no. Go on. Actually, I thought you were stopping there. See, I'm messing everything. I'm like Chris Farley in that Saturday Night Live when he's trying to interview people and he's completely messing it up. That's me right now. But no,
That's
go
the
on.
joy that's the joy of live, uh, programs, podcasts. No, but, when I after the end of the movie, because it wasn't really a documentary, it was a movie, I thought, "Well, this can't be right." A lot of the claims that they were making just didn't ring true to me. And so I went online, I worked for law firms, and so I was able to find, uh, Kelly's direct appeal opinion and Echols' direct appeal opinion. At the time, Echols was also going through Rule 37, and I found the West Memphis 3 website, and it all started there.
I see. So that actually helped come to my next question. I was going to ask did you ever think they were innocent, or did you always have some doubt that that's not true and believed in their guilt?
I have always believed in their guilt. I've never had a doubt in my mind that they were not guilty.
Mhm.
The facts as they were developed in court and even as they were reported in the documentary or movie, um, just don't fit anyone but Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley, and it works. 3 victims, 3 assailants,
Right.
3 different levels of injury.
And yeah, I hate to even bring it up, but the way that they were tied, it was done distinctively different, correct?
Correct.
Right.
3 different types of knots. Um, yeah, it's just there's just too many things, and for me, it never worked that either John Mark Byers or Terry Hobbs could have interacted with as many people as they would have had to have interacted with after having committed these murders
Mhm.
without somebody saying, "He ain't right," and
Right.
then going to West Memphis PD and saying, "Hey, at this point, this was wrong. You need to talk to him." And nobody ever reported Hobbs as a suspect at any point during the investigation. Even
And that's
Echols' investigators didn't see him as a viable alternative suspect.
yeah, and that's something I want to get into a little bit later. And because before we get into the DNA, this whole Terry Hobbs did it thing originated from a particular place, and that's something that I'd like to discuss shortly. Now, so here's a personal question I have. Have you ever been to the location? And when you've been to the location, was it while Robin Hood Hills was still there?
Yes. It was prior to the woods being raised, and I think the owner of the property decided to get rid of the woods and the ditch because of the potential liability with people visiting the site and potentially being injured. At one point, he put a culvert or a pass through over the ditch,
And that
probably
didn't work.
because he didn't want people going down the ditch bank and coming back up and falling and getting hurt because they'd sue him.
Right. I think they
Um,
even placed a dummy cop car there to try to keep people away, and that didn't work either.
yeah, I don't recall ever seeing that. That might have been before I moved to Arkansas in 2001.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was there. I never saw any animals. I never heard any animals. I never saw signs of animals. It was a very small patch of woods. There was a deep ditch running through it. The times that I was there wasn't much water in it because it had been pretty dry. Um, but another thing that we debunked, my group that were investigating, I stood at the ditch bank and I screamed as loud as I could. The person standing with me put his fingers in his ears because it was really loud, and the people at the interstate listening said they thought they heard truck tires squealing,
And,
but
and,
they
th-
didn't identify a
mhm.
human scream.
And because that's what people always say. How could anyone, like, at least part of the theory people tried to say that, oh, the crime couldn't have happened there. They were abducted there. It happened somewhere else. And then they were, for whatever reason, placed back there, where everyone was searching. That makes a
Mhm,
lot of sense. But the other thing is, how can anyone not hear the kids scream? And like, it's right by the service road where there's a freeway, and it's actually pretty loud, as far as my understanding. I wasn't there, but that's what I
mhm.
hear. Is that correct?
Yes, you heard the trucks, you heard vehicles traveling because it was, within 100 yards or so.
Mm.
Um,
So, oh, go on.
no, no, I sometimes just
No,
bad
that's
habit.
okay. So, let's get into this Terry Hobbs thing, because I get a ton of comments about it on my West Memphis 3 stuff. And it's always the same thing. They found his DNA there. The West Memphis Three's DNA, none of it was ever there, but they have Terry's. And, they say Jacoby's, but then they kind of brush that aside and they just focus on Terry. And so they say Terry is the real child killer. Sometimes they'll add other people into it, whether it's David Jacoby or a few others. Um, and then they say that his DNA was at the crime scene. But let me start with this question. Before the so called Terry DNA evidence became a popular thing, how did the Terry did it accusation start? Where did it germinate?
As I recall, when Hobbs and Pam Hicks' marriage ended, I want to say around 2006, but don't quote me.
Okay.
Times are approximate.
Mhm.
She told him, I'm going to tell everybody that you killed Stevie and Chris and Michael. And her family began telling, and I think they were telling everybody in town, in Blytheville and everybody they knew in Memphis, that they were telling that story, and they were talking about abuse of Steve and all these things. But yeah, it started from, her wanting to get custody of Amanda and her wanting to hurt Terry, I think.
Right. And my understanding with that is that the full custody that she tried to get, she lost in that. She didn't get full custody.
I think that the custody was kind of a fluid thing because I think
Mhm.
Amanda was old enough. She would occasionally decide to live with her mother or her mother's family,
Mhm.
but she's alleged that they abused her. So, it's a messy, messy situation. But when Amanda was with them, they were putting ideas in her head. I think she was abusing drugs. They were abusing drugs. And I don't say that to be mean or spiteful, but it's true. They were using drugs and they all have arrests for using drugs
Mhm.
and drug related crimes. Um, so, and, I met Pam and Terry in around 2005.
Mhm.
And I remember one of the comments, a lot of the talk about Terry is domestic abuse of Pam and how she was a, victim, et cetera, et cetera. But when I talked to Pam and that topic came up, she assured me she gave as good as she got in any altercation with Terry or her first husband. So she was not a victim who did not get some of her own back.
Yeah, and just like to summarize it, it was just a very toxic relationship with
Mhm.
a family who didn't like him, eh, but though it is terrible that it would get so ugly that you would accuse someone,
Mhm.
of something like, come on, like that's your kid. And I'm not trying to knock Pam. It's just I can't get into that headspace. I can't get into the headspace of joining a documentary with Echols, his wife, Peter Jackson, Fran, and get paid, and to know that that could be one of the people who killed my son, and I'm taking money for it. I mean, I understand maybe drugs plays a big part, and your addiction can override some of your morality, because those were things that were happening. It's tragic, and like I
Yes.
said, I don't want to beat up Pam, but I just it's tragic. So,
Yes.
all right, so let's get into the DNA, that everyone says is Terry Hobbs' hair fragment, and that it was. Now, I always hear, well, the pro West Memphis Three side, they say it was in the ligature. I heard that may not be necessarily true. It may have just been on the ligature, and it was the one that was used to tie up Michael Moore, if my memory serves me correctly.
Correct.
And so let's start with this. Was it proven that it's Terry's hair fragment?
No. Mitochondrial DNA is never unique. It's never a unique identifier. It cannot be used. There are court cases that say it cannot be used to identify an individual. The most any analyst can say about mitochondrial DNA is that it does or does not exclude an individual.
And what do you say when someone says, well, it may not be able to exclude Terry Hobbs, and that may mean that he didn't do it, but it excludes the West Memphis Three? What about that?
That doesn't a hair in a shoelace does not exonerate the West Memphis Three because it's inconclusive. Also, it doesn't exclude Terry or his brothers and sisters or his mother or his maternal aunts and uncles or his grandmother or his great grandmother or multiple generations of people along that maternal line. They all have identical mitochondrial DNA. Another interesting fact about that DNA is the evidence hair differs from Hobbs's mitochondrial DNA at one nucleotide. So really that hair in the universe does not exclude Hobbs and also would not exclude anybody with the identical full mitochondrial DNA profile.
And let's just hypothetically say that it was Terry's hair just by chance. That wouldn't be unusual, would it?
No, the shoelace could have been the shoelace first could have belonged to Steve. We don't know for sure who the individual shoelaces on each boy, who they belong to. So if the shoelace came from Steve's shoe, it wouldn't be unusual to find a hair from Terry Hobbs on it. Michael was in the house that afternoon. Christopher was in the house that afternoon. So again, picking up a hair from Terry Hobbs in his own house is not exculpatory as to Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley. The only thing that would have really firmly exonerated Echols and Baldwin and Misskelley is finding nuclear DNA full profile from somebody who wasn't them.
And explain what nuclear DNA for anyone who may not know what that is.
Nuclear DNA comes from body fluids such as blood, semen, saliva. I believe they can also get it from epithelial cells now, with what we call touch DNA. It is unique to an individual. And I'm not a scientist and not really good with the sciences, but as I understand it, the profile that you get with nuclear DNA is the combination of the numbers statistically are not common. They're unique to each person, but you'd have to get a DNA expert on to explain
right
accurately why that is, but that's what it is. Mitochondrial DNA is passed from mother to child unchanged, going back generations. And so it can't be ever used to identify a single person. It's inconclusive.
Absolutely. And they found other hair fragments too, a lot of them belonging to familial DNA, like, well, family, like, which would be common too. And before I get too ahead, let's, to put it in context, yeah, Michael was there. As a matter of fact, Michael wanted Stevie to, go bike riding or do whatever they were going to do. So he was in the house. Later, Christopher Byers came over, wanted to know if Stevie was there, and he actually stayed. He actually ended up watching a program, I think, with Amanda, if I remember right. Is that true? Do you remember?
I believe that's one of Pam's statements.
Right. I think in 2007, I think she made that statement.
Correct.
Or maybe before. So
I'm not sure. It's really one of the things that's most difficult for us now is that because the boys weren't related, the murder was not treated as one involving a family member. Mm-hmm. And that makes perfect sense. But the follow through and in-depth interviews were not done with Terry Hobbs, Pam Hobbs, Todd Moore, or Dana Moore, because nobody ever said you need to look at them. They may have had something to do with this. But that did happen with Byers, and that's why Byers and Melissa were more in-depth interviews were taken with them.
And Terry Hobbs, when he was being interviewed by Ron Lax, when it was introduced that they had this magical DNA that was going to crack the case, and he mentioned it to Terry that it was his DNA. Where was I going with this? All right, I lost track.
The interview with Ron Lax.
Yeah, the interview with Ron Lax. There was a point I was trying to make, and I completely lost it. So that's what I get for ad-libbing. But trying to think. So, anyways, how about we just go with this? So, getting back to nuclear DNA, we really couldn't find it, especially in '93. And people talk about it now with the whole test the evidence with this MVAC thing. But the thing is, though, the bodies had been submerged in water, destroying DNA and blood evidence. Keep in mind, there should have been a lot of blood, a lot of it slicked off, all those things. It was located at the scene. There was a possible semen stain which had been located on the pants of one of the
Mhm.
victims, and water destroys evidence. And the serologist who commented on this on the trial. Now, is it Kermit Channel or Kermit Chanel? Like, I always try to see if I can
I
pronounce his name right.
I am not sure. I think it's Chanel,
I think
but
it's, yeah.
I haven't heard him say his name in a long time, so don't quote me.
I even went where they pronounce names because I'm like, I want to make sure I say this right. And it was both. It was Channel and Chanel, and I'm like, well, all right, I
Mhm.
guess Donofrio. I guess we'll just go with that. But I know he testified to the effects of water when it comes to physical evidence, and he stated that when it's wet, especially when submerged in water or even being dirty or soiled, it has a very detrimental effect on any type of biological materials that you might find, and that
Mhm.
explains why you can't try this solely on DNA evidence because it, it's been destroyed. But even if you some DNA evidence, I mean, you had officers that were trudging through that water. There's a lot of cross contamination at these crime scenes too, and that's what I'm worried about when someone says test the evidence. And let's say they do the MVAC thing. If I'm correct, I don't know how involved he got into this other than being at the crime scene, but Jones, who was one of the pro officers who happened to be there.
Juvenile
It wouldn't
probation,
be
yeah.
unusual. Yeah, it wouldn't be unusual if you found his DNA at that scene, seeing that he was there. So I don't know if he got in the water. I don't know what he did. Um, but sometimes I think like it's funny because always says it's a crooked cop. It's a crooked cop. Well, when you put a bunch
Mhm.
of cops at that scene and they are taking care of the bodies um, and trudging through that, would be too hard to maybe find some DNA if you were to really dig, would you?
I don't know about that because, I think what's more likely to happen is what happened already when they did the DNA testing. They came up with some partial profiles that weren't enough to identify anybody. They were enough to exclude from some evidence Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley, but they also excluded John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs. And this is a
All right, hold on one second. Lisa, can you hear me? The thing went off a little. Technical difficulties.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was
there we
just
go.
saying I don't actually think that's likely
Okay.
that DNA from somebody coming into the ditch is going to end up on clothing. What happened in the original DNA testing is that they found partial profiles that weren't enough to identify anyone, but were enough to eliminate or exclude.
I see. I see. And before I forget, I remember where I was going with that Ron Lax interview with Terry Hobbs.
Good.
Finally came to me. Um, Terry didn't recall at the time whether if he gave any DNA to law enforcement or not. And it actually turned out that he did. I think it was October '94, if I'm not mistaken. One of the lab reports where they took DNA from the families because people always talk about, oh, he doesn't want to give his DNA. Oh,
Mhm.
they had to. Well, yeah, when you're the defense, no, he probably doesn't want to give it to you because he knows what you're trying to do. The whole point is to try to exonerate your clients, and they're going to try to find any scapegoat. So that's where I was going with that.
Yeah. And he was under no obligation whatsoever to cooperate with Eccles' attorneys. So any aspersions cast at him for not cooperating are just BS.
Yeah. Well, and he had a pretty good history lesson of what they tried to do. He saw what
Mhm.
happened to John Mark Byers. Is it
Yeah.
Mark John Byers or John? My dyslexia. Yeah, I'm
He
going off.
he it was John Mark Byers and everybody called him Mark.
Yeah. Like,
Um, and
every,
then we have the whole story from with him is to remain relevant after his DNA wasn't found anywhere. Became witness, for the defense accusing Terry Hobbs and trying to get Terry Hobbs to confess
y-
and secretly recording conversations.
it's all over YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but he was just trying to remain relevant, and I think he was always about making a buck.
Yeah, and that was another weird thing is, you know, I know it was a stepson. I know, uh, Christopher took his last name, and it's just it's sad and it's unfortunate to see when there's a tragedy involving someone that you bring in as your own, and then you're waxing poetic on these documentaries or at the courthouse or anywhere else. It's unusual. It's unusual to see. Um, and then the, this is conjecture, this is speculation, but let's have a conversation about it. Do you think Mark thought they were innocent, or do you think that he's like, I'm just going to go where the momentum's going?
He was going where the momentum was going
Uh,
because he was going to become irrelevant if he didn't.
and he wanted to keep that at all costs,
Hmm.
even if, wow.
Hmm.
I know a lot of it is, we're just shooting the shit on that. But I always wondered, because I'm like, because he would act one way in front of the camera, like in part two of Paradise Lost, and I heard he would act one way, but then he would act cool when the cameras were off. And I know one of the supporters would mention that, saying, "Why is it when the cameras are on, you're attacking us, but when it's off, you're totally cool and you're having a regular conversation?" So I always wondered. Hmm.
Mark was a consummate performer, and he was a little bit of a con man. And so, that was where, and this was the perfect stage for him. From the first movie to the second movie to the third movie.
Yeah, I remembered his when the West Memphis Three were going to be freed by taking the Alford plea. I remember the video, not just in the documentaries, but watching some uh, raw footage of him just kind of going off and off about this isn't justice and stuff, and just kind of trying to come off as that angry hero who's pissed
Mhm.
off because we want justice. So, and then of course accusing Terry Hobbs very flippant about it, and I think that's terrible. I understand his need, I guess, for fame, but it's unfortunate. So, anyways, let's move on from that. Let's talk turtles. Let's talk alligator turtles, to be exact. Now, the West Memphis Three experts, they did a number criticizing the assistant medical examiner, Dr. Frank Peretti's work, attempting to discredit his interpretations. I think they had 7 other people try to discredit it and said, "Oh, that's not knife wounds, or it's not this, it's not that.
Correct.
These were turtles." And before turtles, it was Werner Spitz who said it was actually dogs. Somehow,
Mhm.
dogs took the bodies out of the water, uh, and I want to be careful with what I say, because I'm not saying this flippantly, because I have a lot of respect for Michael, Stevie, and Christopher. But basically, took them out of the water, flailed them about, knocked them up against trees, and then somehow magically ended up not just in the water, but like they were pushed in the mud so they would stick.
Mhm. Mhm.
But anyways, so there was that, but then they changed it and it was turtles. Um, do you believe it's likely that turtles could have made those wounds?
No. Chris was face down in the mud. A turtle could not have accessed the front of his body while he was face down in the mud. Turtles would have to be present, and I never saw a turtle in those woods, nor did I see a turtle in the ditch any of the times that I was there. Again, it was dry, but at the time of the murders, there was only about 2.5 feet of water.
Mhm.
So, um, I just no, I don't find it to be at all. I don't think there was any animal predation, and I never understood why they were focusing so much on animal predation, but to try and undermine Dr. Peretti. Because if your clients are absolutely innocent, it doesn't matter how the wounds were made, who made them, or what they used to make them.
And
Because your clients didn't do it,
right.
so it doesn't matter. So I don't know why they focused, and one of the reasons the whole animal predation theory failed is because they paraded all these experts who all had different opinions, different wounds, different animals, different methods and means, and none of them were a cohesive alternative theory that was reliable and credible.
Mm-hmm.
So
So, someone in the chat, let me see. A turtle would not stick to one place of anatomy either. What do you have to say about that?
I'm not really entirely sure about that. My sole experience in life with snapping turtles is a snapping turtle that lived in a pond behind my mother's family's home. And basically, when we went to swim, an adult had to be with us to watch, because there was like a shallow pond and a deeper pond, and there was a sandbar, and the turtle would usually be in the deeper pond or on the sandbar. But if he came on the sandbar and came into the shallow pond, we had to be out of the water quick because he was coming after us. And my uncle and his friends used to kind of tease the poor thing. But that's my sole experience. I never, pushed my luck and stayed in the pond to see what the snapping turtle would do. I always, when the adults started saying get out of the water, I got out of the water quick. So I don't know how they behave. Maybe they would have stuck to one part of the anatomy, although I think it is likely that they would have consumed one part of the anatomy and then started somewhere else. I think there would have been more than just the single wounds on Steve's face and the single wound on Chris's genitals. I do agree with that. I think they would have, and there were other parts of Chris's body easily accessible when he was face down that a snapping turtle would have been more likely to key in on, and that would be the back of his body or the back of his head.
And here's another thing. When you bring in experts and when you have anywhere between $10 to $20 million, and you got a lot of money and you're getting the most world-renowned people, and if you're paying them good money, they're going to give you the interpretation that you want to make their client look innocent or not. Maybe that's the wrong word. Basically, to give a alternative explanation, and that's where you have this thing with the turtles. Now, here's what's really interesting to me, and I don't know if you know this or not, Lisa. You probably do, because you know a lot more than I do. Peretti raised turtles as a hobby for decades. And in fact, Circuit Judge David Burnett, who presided over the original case, as we know, he certified Peretti as an expert on turtles. So wouldn't he know if turtles did it versus if it was something else, a knife?
Yes, and he would have recognized that, and he would have included that into his original report. That's an excellent point, and that's another reason why the parade of experts from Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley, or from Baldwin and Misskelley at the Rule 37, that's why they didn't work, because they were soundly refuted by Frank Peretti.
And
but that's another thing, that fell apart, not because of judicial corruption, but because your witnesses just didn't do a very good job. I mean, they should have at least gotten together and agreed on one theory rather than the spaghetti theory.
Yeah. And so it seems that even when you can prove those things wrong, or you can prove the hair fragment is weak evidence, as a matter of fact, and I talked about this in an earlier episode a couple weeks ago about Terry Hobbs, it isn't just us or the state that said that this hair fragment was weak evidence. That came from their own the West Memphis Three, their own expert, their serologist, Thomas Fedori, he said it was weak evidence and said it may not be Terry's hair, or even if it was Terry's hair, secondary transfer would explain a lot of that away. You couldn't really take that to trial to make that really work. And God, what's that guy's name? Is it Rodan?
Reardon.
Yeah,
Dennis
Reardon.
Reardon.
He goes, well, the point we're trying to make is that if you can't take that evidence to court and convict if you can't convict Terry, then you can't do that with our clients. You can't do that at all. So what happens is, again, getting back on track, the West Memphis Three supporters, they'll say, all right, fair enough. Let's say that it's not Terry's hair. Then they decide to move the goalpost. And so they'll say, but you didn't find anything of Damien, Jason, or Jessie's at the crime scene. And so let me say, maybe I should even put it this way. Was there any evidence that couldn't exclude the West Memphis Three using the same logic regarding a hair fragment that couldn't exclude Terry as the source?
There is a partial profile on one of the swabs, but it's a very broad, it's a male profile, and it doesn't exclude the victims or Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley, according to one of the interpretations of the DNA profiles that we received, or that became public record when they filed their motions for new trial. Now, one of the things I need to point out is we don't have every single DNA report. They
That's true.
filed select analytical reports. So there are reports we don't know if they were as exculpatory as they're making them out to be, because we've never seen them, including the reports for the DNA testing that was being done in 2011 in the lead up to the defense approaching Scott Ellington with the idea of entering Alford pleas in exchange for release.
And they always, that gets brought up, especially when this whole movement of test the evidence happens or comes up, we always ask about that report, and they always have an excuse. We lost the report. But they could get that report if they wanted to and share that, right? Like they could talk to, like Damien could talk to his
I
lawyer, or they could talk to the lab that conducted it if they really wanted to.
Yeah, I don't understand why Bob Ruff is going to Scott Ellington and asking Scott Ellington for the report when Damien Echols could make a phone call to Dennis Reardon and say, "Hey, my dumbass wife lost my report. Can you send me another copy?"
Exactly.
I
And
mean, or I wish it had been found in that storage unit in
yes,
Arkansas, but
yeah.
apparently Lori didn't store any of the legal papers in there. Just the sexually explicit correspondence she exchanged with Echols, who gross.
And if anyone, to put in context, the storage unit, Ed Opperman, he did an interview with the guy, I believe, who owns those. Or
Mhm.
maybe I think the guy who won, like you bid storage wars type stuff where,
Yeah.
if someone doesn't claim it and doesn't pay, then, that stuff gets put up for, is auction the right word? I think it gets put up for auction. And
Yes.
then basically whatever's in that unit you get to have. And so Ed Opperman does an interview. And was William Ramsey, was he in that as well when they did the interview? I think he was.
I don't recall, because I am not a fan of Ed Opperman. His
Mhm.
opinions, the only time I agree with them is with the West Memphis Three. Every other thing that he looks at, every other case he looks at, I totally agree with it. And he also was always begging for money for his legal woes, and I just was sick and tired of that. So, not a fan of Ed Opperman.
I wouldn't say I'm a fan. We didn't have some great conversations either behind the scenes, but it was still a good interview. Like I would still recommend anyone to watch it, the Opperman report with that, because at least you learned a little bit about what was in that storage unit. So,
Mhm.
but otherwise, I don't. You know, I'm not. I definitely wouldn't argue with you there. He wasn't my favorite guy either. see some comments here. I contacted Bode, and they said they keep those results indefinitely and could be found even if it's on an old hard drive. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Why can't we start there just to see what was there that made you guys decide, yeah, fuck it, let's take it. Let's see if the state will take an Alford plea.
Well, Bodie probably would not produce anything to me or you.
No, but they could with Damien,
They
right?
could with Damien. They could with Bob Ruff if he got a release from Damien. They could, of course, with Dennis Reardon if Dennis Reardon doesn't have the file. So no, it could be done. It could be obtained, not by Scott Ellington because he didn't have a contract and Bodie wasn't working for him. They were working for Echols. So thank you, Carrie.
Great question, Carrie. Thank you. Let's see what else I got here. We got some other questions. All right. So this is one of these things that people want to try to add as evidence that Terry Hobbs has to be guilty of these crimes. And it's kind of not black and white. So a lot of people suspect Terry Hobbs because they say he has an inconsistent alibi. They say he changes his story or it doesn't jive with his friend at the time, David Jacoby. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's not fair to Terry because again, he wasn't asked to give an in-depth interview to police or defense attorneys in 1993 or 1994 when events would be fresher in his mind. When he was interviewed by West Memphis PD in 2007, I believe it was, he was citing the best of his recollection. He was giving information to the best of his recollection. And that was that after he dropped Pam off at work, he went to David Jacoby's. They played guitar for a little while. He realized Steve hadn't come home. And so they went looking for Steve a few times. He says he ran into Dana and Mark Byers. He thought it was at 6:00. Mark Byers said it was after the missing persons reports had come in or had been called in. But that doesn't make any sense because at that time he would have been over at Catfish Island with Pam. But I think there is a statement from Dana Moore that Hobbs did come by around the time they were calling the missing person reports in. But anyway, it doesn't really. You can't say that his alibi is set in stone in 2007 anymore. I mean, let's switch tracks. Echols, Baldwin, and Misskelley could not produce a single cohesive, believable alibi in 1993. Why do they expect Terry Hobbs to be able to do that in 2007?
Right. And any kind of alibi that the West Memphis Three individually tried to cook up, all of it fell apart.
Correct.
Spectacularly.
Correct.
So yeah, that, I don't think that's fair. And what do you say when people go, why did he wait so long to tell Pam? Like it was after, was it 9:00? After 9:00 when he went to Catfish Island to go pick her up,
Yeah.
and people thought that why wouldn't you tell her sooner? Now again, speculation on my part. You're not trying to worry your wife. You're just trying to find a child that you just think is off playing or missing.
Mhm.
And you probably don't think the worst until by the time that you start to get worried, it's like, all right, you're talking, you're trying to search, you're trying to look, you're talking to Mark, you're talking to Dana. And then finally, when you get there, it's like, hey, your son's missing,
Mhm.
So did you ever find anything? Because people really, who was it? Who was that FBI profiler that Bob had on that Forgotten West Memphis Three? What's his name?
Clementi, maybe?
Yeah, Jim Clementi, saying that is really suspicious. I'm like, what?
And my impression is, that Terry realized he hadn't come home, so he and Jacoby looked for him. He looked for him, and he probably lost track of time. And then finally, when he goes to see Pam, he has to tell her. Um, that's time got away from him. I don't think it was malicious intent, and it could have been. Also, Pam was and probably remains to be one of those individuals who is a bit high strung.
As a
And
matter of
so
fact,
he
as a
may
matter
not
of
have wanted to call her at work and say, "Hey, Stevie's missing," because she would have freaked out then, and maybe they needed her to keep that job.
and as a matter of fact, what did she say when Terry told her?
Well, she's the one who said that he's dead. I mean,
Right.
Terry's not saying he's dead. Pam's saying he's dead. She had a feeling he was dead.
And
And
that
when
and
she
that
walked in the
mhm,
woods, she had a feeling he was dead.
and that's exactly it. It's that she it, w- I'm thinking even with all of the problems that they even had at that time, is that Terry didn't want to stress her out.
Mhm.
It's like let's not jump to conclusions. You don't need to hop from because you know it's just he's on it. Other people are on it. They are talking. The police were John did Mark call the police and Dana talked to the police, correct?
Correct.
So they're
Mark
already on it.
Right. But, Mark didn't call the police until about 8:15, and that was after he and Melissa and Ryan went around looking for Chris because they thought Chris had just gone somewhere, lost track of time, and they would find him playing somewhere in the neighborhood. And then it was 8:15 and they still hadn't found him and they had no sign of him. So then they called the police. Dana had the same thing where she had seen him at 6. She sent Dawn to call him into dinner and they ignored Dawn. And so she did what she was going to do. And then at 8:15, when she sees a police car at Mark's house, she goes across the street. And it was Dana who said, "Oh, all 3 boys are together." She's the first one to say they're all together. And prior to her informing people that they were all together, Mark and Terry both were looking for Chris and Steve individually. So again, that counters any claim that they saw the boys or that they had anything to do with the murders, because if they had seen the boys and known and done the murders, they would have known that all 3 boys were together.
That's true. And I just think when you look at it, when you really look at everything, it's not. No one thought it was suspicious at the time. It's only
Correct.
until after you talk about a hair fragment that may or may not be Terry's that all of a sudden it just clicks and it makes sense. But
And
then go on, go on.
most of the evidence against Terry is speculative and it's hearsay and it's uh, other bad acts that weren't reported in 1993, but were reported 14 years later after he became a suspect or just prior to him officially becoming a suspect. So, you can't really, if Echols' bad acts prior to the murder, threats against children, threats to kill his family, if none of those things are meaningful as to him being a suspect, then none of these allegations against Terry are meaningful as to him being a suspect.
And now I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
But Lisa, there are 2-star witnesses that talk about something very grim. Cody Curtis God and Christian Blake Sisk claim that Terry's nephew, Michael Hobbs Jr., told them about the Hobbs family secret. That's pretty salacious. Could you tell us what do you think of that? Do you think that holds any water, any merit?
I think those are 2 little thieves who you couldn't believe them if their tongues came notarized, and Mike Hobbs Jr. denied ever making any such statement. His father denied ever having any such statement made to him by Terry Hobbs. And you got to remember, their statements are Mike Hobbs Jr. told us that his uncle told his father that he killed the boys. And his father said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's taken care of." That was the substance of their statements. So they didn't directly hear Terry say anything. They're saying that Mike Hobbs told them Terry said something to Mike Hobbs Sr. So Mike Hobbs didn't hear it firsthand.
And
It's like hearsay. It's like triple hearsay.
and, and
And again,
Cody
they're
and
thieves.
Blake,
They're both
yeah,
thieves.
they don't have the best record. Doesn't it
And
even go beyond thievery?
as I recall, they had a beef against Mike Hobbs Jr. as well.
And it just seems like when you're beefing with someone, just say, basically use the most low hanging fruit that you can find.
Yeah. And you got to remember, I think at the time they came forward, there was a billboard offering a reward. So the two little thieves and drug addicts thought, "Ooh, we can make some money."
Well,
More likely than not, that's where Billy Wayne Stewart and Benny Guy came from.
yeah, I see. It's always why I want to bring it up, is because people need to have context.
Yeah.
So when you hear, because I remember when I heard it, because to anyone listening in the chat, I mean, when I saw the first Paradise Lost, I wasn't. I thought they did it, but I just thought they did. I didn't really question it. Once the second movie came about, then I did. I let the documentary do the thinking for me, and then as time went on, and then I heard about the hair and not quite understanding that it's not as significant as the PR made it out to be. And then once I heard about the, you know, the Terry's confession to his brother that his nephew heard and then told his friends, I thought, oh my God, he has to be the guy,
Mhm.
but once you start looking at the context, or you start hearing the context, you realize that it's a bunch of rubbish. It's not anything.
Mhm.
And, again, I really don't like, talking about the crime scene. Hold on one second. I did not mean to. Carrie, if you're here, I did not mean to ban you. That's not what I was trying to do. There's this guy, Billy Shepard, is like quoting like a bunch of like weird stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard, like when you're talking and you're listening, it's hard to like, I put him in timeout. So Carrie, I am so sorry. That was not intentional. I'm going to go on YouTube right now to see if I can unban you, because
Oh,
that was
poor
not,
Carrie.
yeah, I couldn't do it through live stream. So please understand that was not intentional. That was
Bad boy.
accidental. Well, also these things, I'll tell you what, the chat, sometimes it moves too fast.
Mhm.
And so when you're trying to hit something else, you hit someone. So let me see if I can do it here through,
Okay.
let's see.
I
Okay.
was looking at that. I was like, "What happened?"
Um, so it's just a timeout.
Okay.
So it's just a timeout. Carrie, I'm sorry. I'll figure that out. Please forgive me. That was not intentional, but it is my fault. So forgive me. Um, this interview is just unraveling, Lisa. It's unraveling on me.
Carrie, you can go over to my YouTube page and make as many comments as you want, sweetie.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I just, I'm a tyrant. I'm a tyrant.
Yeah.
So let me see what other see if I have any. Oh, okay. Going back to what I was saying before I saw the Carrie thing, is that, you know, the context. Michael, out of the three boys, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it's a little interpretive, but he got the worst out of the three. Um, would that be an accurate statement as far as the
Mm,
injuries, the bodily injuries?
no, I think Michael was the
Sorry,
least
not
because
Michael.
he
I'm
was the
sorry. I'm sorry.
sneaky.
No, 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 no. I meant to say Christopher Byers. That's my
Christopher
mistake. See? Yeah, Christopher. Yeah.
Christopher and Steve, because Steve had the facial mutilations.
Mhm. And Christopher
And
got it.
but that tracks with 3 different perpetrators. Michael was Miss Kelly's victim. Miss Kelly liked to beat people, but he wasn't as bloodthirsty or cold-blooded as Echols and Baldwin. But he did chase Michael down and bring him back to be murdered. So he's not a prince. And then Echols, I think, did the mutilation of Steve's face with the butt of the knife or the survival knife. Um, and then Baldwin had to one up him and did the genital mutilation of Chris. So I think it was kind of Chris and Steve were more severely injured because there was mutilation involved than Michael.
And that was the thing. Again, it's for me, it's interpretive, but it's like, if Terry's just trying to go after Stevie, um, I wouldn't understand why you go so hardcore on the,
Mhm.
on Christopher. And I know Michael did. Look, it's all bad. Period. There's no first, second, third place here. But I just thought, like, even like, you would just think that Stevie would get it the worst out of the three if it was really like Terry just had a lot of resentment because he, the conjecture or the statements by Pam's like sisters was that he was jealous of Stevie because he was in the way so that he
Mhm.
could love, but they were already having problems.
Well,
Like,
and those statements and this alleged abuse, as it was with Chris, was never corroborated by contemporaneous medical
mm,
reports or records, school records, police records. Steve had a lot of mandatory first reporters in his life, and none of them ever reported any suspicion of any abuse. And again, we have to go back to the fact that neither Pam nor her sisters went to West Memphis PD and said, "Hey, you need to look at Terry Hobbs because he abused Steve. Uh, he was washing clothes the next day, and whatever, he abused Steve all of his life. He beats Pam. You need to look at him." Nobody did that.
and that's the other thing too. He wouldn't have time, even with the inconsistent time frames of what we know, to go hang out with his buddy Jacoby, who he did say hung out with him.
Mhm.
And then they went and they went out to find Stevie, do all these things, talk to Mark, talk to Dana, do all these things, and so to commit the murder that quick, to go change, shower, do whatever you're going to do, and no one's going to notice.
Right.
Like it,
Exactly.
but guess who they did? One witness did find uh Hollings. Is it? Yeah, Hollingsworth. The Hollingworth's. God, I'm saying the word wrong.
Mhm.
Hollingworth's clan. Um, they saw someone muddy
Correct.
walking. Was the service road?
Yes.
Looking muddy as hell. And who was that?
That was Damien Echols, with someone they believed was Dominique Tier.
But could have been mistaken for Jason because we know that Domini wasn't out. She was with her at home, and
With her
with her
mother.
with her mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, and only time she went out, I believe, was to walk the dog, and that was it.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not trying to go too off course and go down like these different, because the West Memphis Three, you could talk about so many different subcategories, but Damien, he liked to wear those black trench coats or those overcoats, right?
Mhm.
And again, in that 2007 statement that Pam gave, she said that, I believe it was Stevie Branch Sr., the biological father of Stevie,
Mhm.
found a black trench coat. Does that sound right?
I don't recall hearing that.
Yeah. In the interview, she was saying that they found a black trench coat at the scene. Um, Let me see. I can go see if I can go on
Pam was
Callahan.
heavily medicated, I think, at the time she did these interviews with. Is this from Dimension Films?
No, no, this was an actual report. Let me see. Give me one
Okay.
second. I'm going to go to the Callahan website.
Okay.
Um,
'Cause I
and
don't recall that, but, like I said, Pam was heavily medicated, uh, after May 6th, and so, again, you can't put too much stock in some of the things she said because she may have been imagining wishful thinking.
she could have, but at that time, this is where she's trying to point it towards Terry, and it's odd because she makes that
Oh,
statement.
okay.
Yeah, and so when
Okay.
that gets brought up, she's not trying to incriminate the West Memphis Three or Damien in particular, I'm going to go to documents. I'm going to look up Pam Hicks because the interview and look up 2007, and then we'll just we'll brush through it.
She was heavily medicated during that period too, but it was probably not under doctor supervision.
Most likely, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not arguing that at all.
So
Let me go to. I'm sure it'll be. I'm gonna look under H for Hicks. Pam Hicks. To the H. All right, Pamela Hicks and transcribed interview PDF. Let's see. Is it the there's a few 2007. Let's see. Subject description. Let me try this. The PDF file first.
mm-hmm.
Hope that's all right. Here we go. And what I'll do, I'm going to go ahead and present. Share screen. And share. I'm going to see if I can find this. So hopefully, I'm not going to try.
Okay.
I don't want there to be too much dead air, but I'm going to see if I can find that statement.
Okay.
Because it is here. But if not, you guys should check out the Pam Hobbs interview and just look in 2007, and it will be in there. And I believe that.
Yeah, but this actually, I'm thinking. I know in 2007, in or around there, the Hobbs versus Pasdar case, the Dimension Films interview is something that they attached as an exhibit, but it was not from 2007. It was from when they sold their life rights to Dimension Films.
I see.
And so that may be prior to her turning on Terry's, because as I recall in that interview, Terry was sitting right next to her.
Yeah. Well, this one, she's talking to Lieutenant Ken Mitchell and Detective Chuck Knowles.
Okay.
So I believe, and you can see there's a lot to go through. And I knew, I'm like, I should have left that open, and I probably should have put that in my notes. But I didn't think, because I'm like, well, it's not Terry related. I wanted to keep it just isolated to the whole Terry Hobbs evidence. Did it exist? Did it not? And I want to do that. Yeah. But now it's like it's gonna bug me if I don't find it.
I generally take things like that with a grain of salt unless there's a contemporaneous report that says Steve Branch Sr. turned in this trench coat found at the crime scene, which never happened.
No, it didn't.
So she, and again, if that's the statement she gave in 2007, she may be misremembering.
And she could have. I would have to see if Stevie Branch Sr., if he could corroborate by saying, yeah, I did find it. So that would have to be something I'd have to look a little more into. Because keep in mind, they weren't looking, they didn't know who they were looking for. They weren't thinking they were trying to find, some kind of like witchcraft guy,
Yeah.
But, so if anyone wants to look, you'll have to read through this. And what I'll do later, Lisa, if I can find it specifically, I'll send it to you. I always thought it was interesting because the West Memphis Three Facts, they talked about it on the group. It was one of those posts, and I was like, I never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
well, you have to be careful too, because what happens a lot of times is that, especially, well, it happens on both sides, nons and supporters. They read a post from somebody who's maybe speculating, and then they take that as proven fact, and they start posting it as proven fact in other forums.
Right. And I wasn't sure.
And then it becomes a fact of the case when it never was. Like the urine in the stomachs.
Right.
It becomes a case myth. And so that that could be she may have been talking about black trench coat and somebody has extrapolated found by Steve Branch Sr. Although I don't know that Steve Branch Sr. I don't recall when he came to West Memphis, whether it
Yeah,
was after the boys were found or while they were still missing.
I believe, if I remember the story correctly, I believe he was helping to search, and that's when he found the black trench coat. That's my understanding. But like I said, as you can see, man, there's just so much here. So
Yeah.
much. And it's small print. And yeah, it's one of those things that I'll have to show you a little bit later. And it wasn't anything, it's like it was just interesting. And because if it was because my understanding that when they was searching Damien's trailer, they didn't find a coat. And he's always wearing that thing. He's always wearing it. Summer, winter, spring,
But
fall.
I think the Hollingsworth observed him wearing it that night, so it couldn't have been left at the crime scene.
I'd have to go back, but I thought they just said he had a black shirt on and black
Okay.
pants.
And then Andrew Foreman has posted a comment, I don't think you've seen it yet. Didn't Steve Branch Sr. find the plastic bag with the moldy clothes? Maybe that's what they're mixing up.
It could be. That actually very well could be.
So, I mean, this case, you have to speculate to a degree, and you have to try and extrapolate to a degree. But that's the problem with the case that was, gosh, 31 years ago this year.
Yeah, it's coming up soon.
And it's worse when when you don't have case documents as widely available. But what I always do is try to look for corroboration either in the case documents or in the court opinions.
And that makes it. And it's also when things are happening, when statements are made much sooner, they're a lot more probably more likely to be more reliable than something that was made decades later, like in 2007. So yeah, it's possible that Pam could have misremembered what Steve Sr. found. And to me, I wasn't trying to make it as proof. I just thought it was just profound because at that point, she's not trying to condemn the West Memphis Three. She's now trying to, put it on Terry. So when the statement was made, I was like, a black coat, because she didn't say, "Oh, a black coat." I think it was Damien's, So when she said it, I just thought it was an interesting statement.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, and if Steve Sr., like if it's something he can say, "No, I found a black coat." Now again, it's been so many years. At the end of the day, do we need a black coat? No, we don't.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still interesting. It's interesting, and again, like didn't Jason's mom? Again, this is according to what Pam said. Again, didn't she go to the house of Terry and Pam after the murders?
I believe that she did. But I think there was some confusion as to whether the name on the report was Grinnell or something else. So I think there's some dispute as to whether that was true or not.
Right. And even to me, I thought, I'm like, well, it's a small community.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear something that happens, and if he, we can't assume whether she knows her son did something or not. So if she's going, a lot of people were going to their houses. Like, as a matter of fact, the two names escape me, but the boys or the teenagers who, not teenage, well, maybe they were teenagers, but I think they were of age when they left a couple days later and they headed west to California. There's a statement that one of them was asking for a picture of one of the boys, and Pam thought that was odd. So,
Brian Holland and Christopher Morgan.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and that's another thing. Again, not to jump through all these subcategories, but the West Memphis or the West Memphis Police Department, they weren't just looking at Damien and
Mhm.
Jason. They weren't. Jessie wasn't even on their radar as far as a
Right.
possibility. But they were looking at a lot of they were looking at sex offenders. They were looking at trucker logs. They were looking again the two guys that went west. It's not like they just now. Yeah, Damien. Okay, he was one of them, but it's not like they're saying we're just going to go pin it on this kid.
Mhm.
You know, and is there anything more you can add to that? Was there anything else that they looked into that just showed that they weren't trying to focus in on one thing, but they were trying to look at so many different things?
I think that there was an allegation of them illegally obtaining veterans' psychiatric treatment records.
I,
Um, very early on, and this was because you got to remember the murders happened on May 5th, and it wasn't until June 3rd that they said, "Oh well, let's talk to some of these friends for Echols, Baldwin. Let's go. Let's talk to Jessie Misskelley, see if he knows anything." Because Echols did stay on a suspect list. However, when you're in a town with somebody telling a juvenile probation officer that they're in a cult, about to graduate to human sacrifices, that they like to drink blood, and just being an all-around asshole, you gotta expect that when 3 kids turn up dead, people are gonna think maybe you did it.
right, and look at how and see when people people always talk about when they watch that thing with Terry Hobbs with that interview. What is it called? They call it something in particular, but basically they're questioning Terry Hobbs for that defamation lawsuit
Oh,
with the
the
Dixie Chicks
deposition, yeah.
deposition. There are certain things that Terry says, and they go, "Oh, he looks guilty. Look at him. Oh,
Mhm.
he's this, he's that." But you know what? You know what they don't show you when Damien Echols was in that courtroom, blowing kisses to the family and other people, licking
Mhm.
his lips, acting like a complete utter, like I said, not a good human being.
Right.
And
Or his testimony on the stand,
yeah,
where he was caught in multiple lies on the
eh,
stand. He was caught admitting that he and his family adjusted the times of their alibi to fit the facts as they were
mhm,
learning them. You
right.
know.
And if Jesse's, they always say, "Oh, there was nothing credible about his confessions." And yeah, look, Jesse was trying to do things to minimize himself. And to give an
Mhm.
example of that, the Watts case. Look what Chris Watts with the murder of Shannon Watts and those two beautiful girls. He acted like, well, the reason why I killed my wife is because she killed the kids and I couldn't take it, so I
Mhm.
killed her. So I
Mhm.
guess that means we can just throw everything out because he didn't tell the truth the first time. So let's just throw everything
Right.
out. And you can't do that. It's not uncommon. Even Brendan Dassey, with the separate trial of Stephen Avery and then Brendan Dassey, he tried to minimize his actions.
Mhm.
It's not abnormal. And no, yeah, cops do they try with leading questions. They try to do this. And is it perfect? Absolutely not. But you know, Jesse said a lot of things that only someone at the crime scene can know.
Right.
And a lot of it was very consistent. And one of the things that's interesting, if anyone watched the Paradise Lost, the first docu series, even though they split it up in two when it first came out, which just for sake of argument, it's just one thing. Um,
Mhm.
he talks about how Jesse was drinking whiskey and Jason and Damien were drinking beer.
Mhm.
And at the courthouse, when I think it was getting close to, come to a ruling to see what the jury, what they found, whether guilty or not guilty. It was Damien was asked, "Hey, you beat this thing. You gonna buy the beer?" What does he say?
No more beer.
No more beer, whiskey.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's just it's the little nuances. Um, it's like if that wasn't true, you don't say something like that. I don't really
Mhm.
think that would be in the back of Damien's mind through that, through the confessions and things like that. those are little details and that you have to focus on. Is again, is that one thing that can convict them? No, but it's a whole bunch of little things which becomes a totality, hence the
Correct.
totality of the evidence. So, Lisa, is there anything else you think we should add to this?
No, I don't. I think we've pretty much covered, we've covered Terry Hobbs is not a viable suspect in this case for a lot of reasons. The primary one being it just isn't plausible. And there's no evidence that proves that. The mitochondrial DNA on a hair found in or on a shoelace is not conclusive evidence of his involvement. And
And
that's really all they have aside from speculation and hearsay and accusations of abuse and bad acts that were not reported in 1993 at the time Steve was murdered.
Yeah, and I think we've established that. I would be curious if anyone still else has doubts, but I just don't think that there is. And sadly, this is something that will continue for a long time. And there's going to be people that's going to be so heavy in a tribalism that it doesn't matter what you say. They're going to believe what they're going to believe because they're told this is how you should believe.
Correct.
And, you know, it was Mr. Bojangles, it was Mark, it was Terry. It seems like
Christopher Morgan.
Christopher Morgan.
If you want to see a truly coerced false confession, look at Christopher Morgan in Oceanside when he was being questioned by Oceanside police.
And you can find that's on YouTube.
False confession.
Yeah. And I believe that's on YouTube as well.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to search for it. It's there. So anyone that wants to do a deep dive, and if you got a lot of time on your hands, you can listen to it. Last time I remember listening to it, it was in parts, but now, YouTube, it lets you, put almost endless hours on as long as you've been on for a while. So if you guys want to find that, do it. But anyways, Lisa, thank you so much. This was not a perfect live stream to start, but I think it had a lot of good information in it, and I really appreciate it. I really do.
Thank you so much for having me. And it was a pleasure talking to you again, and I look forward to doing it down the road.
And I'm sure there will be another one. And that's the beautiful thing of it too, is that as much as I do know, you know a lot more, so you can kind of set me straight. So, and you should.
But you're not bad. I mean, as I told you before we went on the air, there are a lot of really great positive comments on your content with this case and many others, and I think you're doing a great job.
I appreciate it. I am the Daniel-san to you're Mr. Miyagi, so thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone else, thank you so much. Again, thank you for grinding it out, especially in the beginning. I do believe that the technical issues that we were facing kind of went away. I wonder if it was because of the video. I think it may have been. Maybe what I should have done is I should have just had it on YouTube and then just share the screen. It usually plays out better. But regardless, it doesn't matter. This was a great, great episode, a great live stream. Thank you, everyone, and I'll catch your ass down the road.